announced last week that our subject tonight would be marriage. And I must tell you about a girl who was telling me the other day about the kind of man that she wanted to marry. She said she was going to marry a man who did not smoke, who did not drink, who danced, sang, and told jokes, and who would shut up when she said to shut up, and who would always present a very good picture. I said, you don't want a man, you want an Admiral television set. And apropos of marriage, my angel was telling me a good one. It seems as if he was looking down into hell the other day from a great distance. And Satan was looking over all of the newcomers, and they were really flooding in. But there was one individual who came in who was strutting up and down like a peacock. And the devil said to him, "Say, says, you act as if you owned the place." He said, "I do. My wife gave it to me." And apropos of marriages that break up, I heard of two little children at the seashore, and one said to the other, "How do you like your new daddy?" "Fine." And the other one said, we did too. We had him last year." Well, we're going to fit the subject of marriage into a general law of life. Because marriage is subject to a law which concerns almost every human activity. And that law is this: that no one ever achieves a pleasure in a permanent form until after passing through a moment of pain or tedium. To put it in other words, no one ever rises to a higher kind of love without a death to a lower kind of love. That means, therefore, that in every love and in every pleasure, there are actually three moments. The first moment is a moment of transient pleasure. The second moment is a crisis. And the third moment is permanent joy. Now let us give some examples of this law. For example, you want to go swimming. And there's anticipation of the pleasure. And then comes the crisis. You go into the water and you get the shock of the first cold plunge. If you survive the crisis, then you have the joy of swimming. Take, for example, a boy who's given a violin. He wanted a violin, he desires to be a musician. First, he has the immediate pleasure, the first love, the ecstasy of possession. Polishes his violin, he puts it into a case. And then comes the crisis. He has to take lessons. He has to give up baseball. And he has to learn, go through all of the various exercises, learn the combination of the bow and the violin. And if he can survive that crisis, if he can stick at it, he will eventually achieve the permanent joy of being a musician. I remember once talking to Mr. Fritz Kreisler, and he was telling me that he was to play on the radio the following evening, and I said, "Did you practice for it?" He said, "No." I said, "Will you practice tomorrow before the concert?" He said, "No." And he said, "I'll just take my violin out and play it." At that point, Mrs. Kreisler said, "You know, I always contended that if Fritz had only practiced, he would have been a great violinist." This law is so very general that it applies even to the spiritual life. You would be surprised how the states in the spiritual life of anyone who gives himself to God follows a vocation, such as my own. How much the three states correspond to the three states of marriage. First of all, when you enter religious life, the seminary, or a convent, or a novitiate, It's so easy. You're so full of happiness. Meditation is easy. You never get enough prayer. Temptations, they do not bother you. You have an immediate sense of the presence of God, and you're always in a great emotional glow. And then comes the letdown. Then after a while, you pass through a crisis. You no longer have this emotional satisfaction. And it's hard to make the meditation. Prayer becomes very tiring and even boring. You hate to get up in the morning early. I heard of one monk who was always late for meditation. The superior called him in, and he said, you have to get up tomorrow morning at 5 o'clock and make your meditation before you go to the altar. Now, tomorrow morning when you awaken, you imagine that you're in purgatory, and the flames of purgatory are enveloping you, and you'll immediately bound out of bed and come down for meditation. The monk was late as usual. The superior called him in. He said, did you do what I told you to do? Yes, he said, I did, but I love purgatory. And this is the moment where we are apt to break down. And simply because we find it hard to be spiritual, the world begins to make an appeal. We may even begin to compromise, may even try to serve both God and mammon. And at this moment, one has to decide for himself whether he's going to take all the trials and crosses and difficulties of life and incorporate them into himself spiritually, whether he's going to make more sacrifices in order to achieve a higher love, and if he successfully passes through that crisis, then he attains a joy and a peace that surpasses all understanding. Now, what happens in the spiritual life happens in marriage. So now we come to the 3 moments of marriage. And the first moment is when you're immediately married. He's the most wonderful man in the world. And she's an angel. It's ecstasy, joy, music, peace, contentment, ecstasy. What more could one ask for in life? And one is absolutely certain that this is going to endure. We'll not be like other people. We'll be happy always. And so the love songs have a ring of eternity about them. Now, what about this first moment? We are saying that according to the law of life, it's a very transient pleasure. And so it is. In this first moment, and I do not mean just a moment, I mean for a year or 2 years. In this first moment of transient pleasure, it is well to remember that what is affected is only the instinct, sometimes the ego. The instinct is satisfied. The ego is thrilled. But personality is not changed. Despite appearances, each person remains exactly what he was. The man has what he desires: possession and love. The woman has what she wanted: to be loved and the fulfillment of desire. And though the couple may not know it, at this moment there is very often a projection of the self into the other person. And it seems as if one is really loving only the other person without concern of self. But it must not be forgotten that the other person can be loved because of the pleasure that that other person gives. It could happen that in that love one is like Narcissus. Remember the legend of the god who saw himself reflected in a pool and fell in love with his own image? And so one may fall in love with his own image that is projected into another, because that other is for the time being the satisfaction. But personality does not change. For example, suppose you're very, very hungry. And then you're invited to a fine dinner. Your instinct for food is satisfied, but you're not a different personality than you were before. You're just the same. Suppose you kept your food on a windowsill. Try to keep it cool. Then somebody gave you an Admiral refrigerator. Say 2 commercials in one evening. That's too much. See, Mr. Saragossa ought to be delighted with that. All right, you keep it. You finally get an Admiral refrigerator. You're the same personality. Though your desire for keeping foods cool has been thoroughly satisfied. And so it is in this first moment of love. There is no change actually in either person. Now, that does not mean to say that we must deride and mock this first moment of love, of transient pleasure. Not in the least. It's something fine and something good and something noble and something God-given. It is well to remember, however, that it is the frosting on the cake. That God puts the attraction there in order that we may consume all that married life has in store for us. And great pleasures are given because great responsibilities are to follow. It is the bubble in the champagne that makes it momentarily attractive. It is the self-starter of the motor. And then the motor's got to put and put and put and put all through the rest of its existence. They're in the clouds, yes. They are not to be condemned for being in the clouds. That is the only way that you can ever get to heaven, passing through clouds. That's the first moment. But it does not last. The law of life gives no guarantee of the permanence of such transient ecstasies. Then comes the crisis. Ah, the crisis. Then, in the moment of crisis, one begins to feel that one is opposite a personality who does not share completely his or her views. There's satiety. One is no longer thirsty at the border of a well. All the little imperfections of life begin to reveal themselves. There come increasing dissatisfactions, and there may even be, for those who do not understand the law of life, a protesting and a blaming of the other partner for having cheated him. For she promised to be a goddess and she was not a goddess. This is the moment when the cooing stops and the billing starts. And it seems as if the lamp of happiness, which so lighted them, is gradually being carried out of the room. And they seem less and less to be in possession of its brilliance. Marriage then begins to be like luggage. They think they are getting out of it only what they packed into it. And at this moment, when the disillusionment comes, and one becomes habituated and used to even the best, then there are those who have the very false solution. Some will say, well, now we are incompatible. Let us get a divorce. Incompatible. Do you know two people in all the world who are always and perfectly compatible? No two people in the world are compatible. If there ever was a silly reason for breaking up a marriage, it's incompatibility. So some will think of divorce. Then maybe the husband concentrates on business and she concentrates on bridge. Maybe there's alcoholism, maybe there's barbiturates. Maybe there's infidelity. Maybe there's an aloneness together. And they feel that life holds nothing more in store for them. How foolish they are. Why, this is not the end of love. This is merely the death of an illusion. They have not hit the bottom of love. No one ever does. They have only hit the bottom of their instincts. And now, if they will persevere and begin to use a different kind of food, they will come to the third moment. The food of the first moment was a food in which there were gifts and trips and flowers that nourish love. Now there are trials, children, a little boredom, sacrifices, worries, mutual anxieties, and all of these become the food of the new love. And if they will stick it out during this moment of crisis, as anyone does in life that wants to do anything, to learn a language, to become a musician, to become a scholar, if they will stick it out, then they will discover themselves face to face with a personality. Something new will be revealed. In the first moment, it was the body that led the soul. Now it is the soul that leads the body. Now they discover opposite them a mind, a heart, the growing of a mystery. And one begins to see that the other partner, for example, that is opposite him, is not a colony. A colony to be expropriated as the head of an empire might expropriate it, but rather that the other partner is like a fatherland, something to be cultivated, something to be loved, like our own glorious country. Then they begin to see that the other partner is one whose mystery is not sounded by traveling in a circle. In vain do people say, let us get back to the way we were, as if love traveled in a circle like a planet. Rather, love is like a spiral. It's a great ascension. And they discover themselves now pulled more and more together by a great mysterious force outside of themselves, which they may discover to be even the very voice of God. Now they learn that this unity which they have is something that is far deeper than the assimilation at which new lovers strain. That beyond the physical rack and strain of all that emotion, there is something added to it now, namely the beautiful communion of living together and walking before God in peace and happiness. And those who have reached this third stage of love because they've survived that moment of trial and stuck it out are those who, well, we'll speak of their spouses. Chesterton once spoke of his wife. Chesterton once said to his wife, I believe you're the most ignorant woman in all the world, because you do not know how beautiful you are. Beautiful? At what age? Remember, it's love that creates beauty. Dostoevsky said, I would give anything in all the world to be married to a woman who would care a little bit because I was just a little late for dinner. I always liked the toast that was paid by one husband to his wife, and every one of the guests were very much startled by it because it seemed to be rather shocking at first. He toasted her and said, here's to a face that would stop a clock. and bid all time stand still to contemplate her beauty. This is the kind of love that we knew, most of us, in our parents. The trouble is that today people do not stick together long enough to find out if they really love one another. They are falling in love with an experience, not in love with a person. Remember that all experiences are replaceable. A person is absolutely irreplaceable. No one, for example, can take the place of your own mother. No one. And therefore, marriage is bound up with the great law of life. It is bound up with that law of life that was revealed on the Mount of the Transfiguration. You remember that our blessed Lord went on that mount. And when on it, his face did shine as the sun. His garments were as white as snow. Peter saw it. And Peter said, Lord, it is good for us to be here. Let us build 3 tabernacles. One for thee, one for Moses, one for Elias. And our Lord had for him nothing but the withering scorn of his silence. Our blessed Lord, while Peter was asking that transient glory be made permanent, our blessed Lord was speaking to Moses and Elias of his death. In other words, he was telling Peter, Peter, this glory that you see now is only the glory of a promise. It is not the glory of fulfillment. In order to attain that, you must pass down this hill, and you must go up another hill, which is the hill of Calvary. And on that hill of Calvary, you will find a trial, a crisis, a crucifixion, a disappointment. And if you will survive that moment of trial, that moment of crisis, then you will pass to a moment of glory that will be permanent and surpass all understanding. This is the law of life. This is the law of love. Bye now, and God love you.